Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting Tuesday, January 15th, 2019, in the McAuliffe Hearing Room. All selectmen are present. First item on the agenda is public comment. All right, we'll move on from there. Thank you. With the board's indulgence, I'd like to bring up under other matters before the board, Youth and Family Services, if we could move that up. I'd also ask the board to put this item on hold until our next meeting. Some information has come to light that will be discussed next week, so we can have a complete package before we take a position. So, if, with the board's indulgence.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you. And back to the normal agenda. Scheduled appointments. Bill Freyer, I was close. Presentation of fiscal year 2018 town audit report. Sir, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be back, and as I guess I say every year, the good news to report is that the audit went well, once again. You go into an audit, I guess, basically hoping there are no major surprises and no major issues with the numbers that you're given to audit, and everything went well this year. In the management letter, the important thing to know is there's 3 tiers. I know there's a couple of new people maybe this year. There's 3 tiers of comments: material weaknesses, reportable conditions, and then pretty much everything else is lumped under other matters. And all of your comments are under the other matters. Nothing is of a serious nature in terms of internal control issues, so that's good. The biggest issue for the audit this year was we had to adopt GASB 75, and I know it's everybody's favorite topic, but that relates to OPEB, to the other post-employment benefits, which is essentially retiree health insurance, mostly. Not to get into the nitty-gritty of the accounting, but because of the changes that were required by GASB, on your balance sheet, your liability increased from $29 million to $37 million. It isn't an increase in the actual liability itself, it's more in the it was an increase due to the way GASB is now making you present this liability. So overall, you have a $37 million liability related to employees who are retired and employees who are currently serving you but earning that benefit over the life of their employment. So the fact that you have begun putting in $250 a year is you know, it's a nice start. And it's more than most communities are doing. I did ask, Mark, you had mentioned about where you fell. I asked your actuary if he had any statistics on that, and he did give me some. Unfortunately, it's a very broad range, so basically all I can tell you is that you're in the top 50% of communities in this state in terms of how much you're funded against the liability. I know that's a broad range because 51 versus 90 is a big difference. But maybe the next time Parker comes in, he can give you some more detailed. But I know in terms of the towns I audit, you know, $250,000 a year is a good, you know, is a good number. It's just going to take you a long time to get up to that, to funding a $37 million liability. Other than that, there really wasn't anything important that changed from last year. So we have our slides, and they are up there if you would like to look up there, or you may have some handouts. And as I try to do every year, I try to put up 5 years so that we see, you know, it's tough to look at 1 year in a snapshot, you know, or in a vacuum. So when you see a 5-year analysis, you can kind of pick up trends and such. So we put this up. The general fund is your main fund, obviously, your operating budget fund, and it's the fund that you know, Moody's probably spends the most time on whenever you go for a bond rating. And I think the importance and the good thing about the numbers in this chart is that there's a lot of consistency here. One of the things I know the bond rating people frown on is a lot of changes, ups and downs. In good times we spend, in bad times we cut right back. So they like to see an average growth around the 3% range because they feel like that's a proper amount of growth to reflect changes in health insurance and benefits and other things without it being too high to be sustainable over time. When growth is really small, they start to worry about, well, is the town not investing enough because they don't have resources to do that? So when you look at numbers like this, which pretty much except for, a year in 17 that went a little beyond that, you're sticking in that range of around 2%, plus or minus 1%. And you've got a 5-year average, coincidentally, on both the revenue side and the expense side, of a 2.6% change. So that's, to me, those are good numbers. Like I said, you wouldn't want to see a lot of ups and downs, and you wouldn't want to see a 5-year average that was around 0. You also wouldn't probably want to see a 5-year average around 5 or 6%, because, again, Moody's would say, well, is that sustainable over time? The next slide, thanks, Brian. So I like to show what town meeting and the budget planning process budgeted to use to fund current year operating budgets and articles versus how the year ended up and whether you were able to actually put that money back into the coffers, if you will. So the first column shows you the free cash and other amounts that you use to help offset the budget, including the capital items. Most of that is free cash, but it can also include overlay surplus or old articles that you're repurposing, closing out. And then the second column shows how you actually did for the year versus your budget. So anytime that second number, the second column number, is larger than the first, you've actually put back more than you plan to use, which is great, because then next year you have about the same amount of money to use. If the delta goes the other way and your budgetary variance is below what you used, then your free cash is going to go down. So you've actually had a pretty good track record here. Again, other than a tough year in 15, you have a pretty good track record of mostly or fully replenishing what you had planned on using for the year. And that has allowed you to then go into the next budget cycle with about the same amount of money, plus or minus. The last two columns show how you did budget versus actual on your revenues and your expenses. And again, we talked about this every year. We like to see these numbers around 2%, 1 to 2%. You don't want the budgets to be so tight that if you have a year where things dip, you're going to be in a deficit situation. And at the same time, if your budget to actual numbers are too high, then people start to think, well, why are the budgets so conservative? So what I always say is when you add the revenue and the percent line, if you're revenue and expense percentages, if you're around 4%, then that's a good place to be. And again, I'm not making up these are actual numbers, but I'm not making up the targets. You seem to be falling where you need to be, right around that, 3 to 4% every year. So again, if Moody's was looking at this and evaluating the town's bond rating, this would be another positive, because it's not too high, not too low. And I have some towns that are really struggling with some of these right now. It's tightening up out there the last couple of years. Next slide is the status of the town reserves. And again, the bond rating community typically looks at free cash and stabilization. For those of you who have been around here long enough, you've heard me say that stabilization, based on decisions that were made, had come down significantly, and it's kind of stayed at a certain level. There was a time when it was more up in the millions, and then there was some discussion of whether that was too high. Things were used, and for the last 5 years, as you can see on this sheet, you stayed in about the mid-4 to mid-500 range. That is low for a budget this size, but I also know that your priority has been putting some money into OPEB, and you can only do so much at the same time. But this, anyway, is a snapshot. The last column is probably the key, and that's the percent of budget. What are the town's reserves as a percent of budget? The target is typically 8 to 12%. You have been, since stabilization got depleted, we're probably talking 10 years now, you have been on below that lower range. But, it's not a requirement, it's just a suggestion. So that's number 3. 4, this is sort of where I started out with the OPEB because of the new GASB. So this shows your total OPEB liability. And again, the big jump in that first column from 17 to 18 is only because GASB basically changed the way that this number is measured and presented. So it really wasn't a big jump. It was just without getting into too much detail that would really bore everyone, it was just a change in the accounting standards. But it will go up every year because, again, every year people that are active employees are 1 year older. They're getting 1 year closer to that benefit. if your retirees aren't falling off the health insurance, then you just have more people, so you have a bigger liability. It's going to grow. The nice set of numbers to look at is the OPEB trust, where it's gone from 55,000 at the end of 14. Well, it actually went from 0 at the end of 13 to 1.2 million. So that's great. You've been making an effort to make that investment, to put money aside in the trust fund. Still a big difference between 37 and 1.2, but it's a good start. And the net oops, can you just go back? Sorry. The last column is the net pension liability. That's obviously out of your control. It's the regional pension plan. But starting in 2015, GASB required that to actually be put on your balance sheet. Before that, you didn't even put the fact that you had this share of the regional system's pension liability in your financial statements. It was just in a little footnote telling people that, the Worcester system had a $100 million unfunded liability, and you had about 3% of that. GASB said, no, we need to quantify this, and so now they push out numbers to all the members, and this is your number. Now, supposedly, in your assessments that you pay every year to the regional system, they are amortizing this unfunded liability to be fully funded by 2032. We'll see. Hopefully that will happen. They've set, I'm saying that not to be completely sarcastic, but, they've set these deadlines before, and then the economy goes down and they pull back and give people a few more years. But it's important at least that it's being addressed, because that combined with, you can look, your pension liability and your OPEB liability are over $62 million, 63 and a half. So that's a big number for, a town this size. All right, thank you. Debt. So we've talked about debt. That's a big focal point of the bond rating agencies, of course, and you had the luxury after all of that borrowing that was done in the mid-2000s, early 2000s for all the school projects that were approved. You really have been drawing down on the debt. So when you got to the end of 17, you were at total debt of the town was 13 million. That's very small for a town with the budget your size. Obviously, with the public safety complex, the debt ticked up this year, so there was a big jump. But you're still on the very low end of a debt level for a community this size. So again, that's a good thing. And then the last slide is for fixed assets, and I think it's important to see this because you want to make sure that with all the budgetary needs that are out there and the competing attention for funds, that the town is able to continue to put money into the fixed assets. So again, I know there's a lot of numbers on this slide, but you have the gross fixed assets and the net being after depreciation. And you've been able to keep, even without a big project until this public safety complex came in 18, you've been able to keep investing in equipment, in the roads, in the infrastructure, and in the water, so that you've been able, despite everything else, to keep up with the fact that your fixed assets have continued to increase even after depreciation. So that's a very positive thing. Those are the 6 slides. That's really all I had to say, but obviously happy to answer any questions or any.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I just have one question, and it relates to the OPEB slide and the liability slide. So I know you had mentioned other towns may not be in the position that we are. Would you say we're more the average, or we're a little bit ahead of where other municipalities may lie?
Yeah,
I
think you're ahead. I mean, as I said, that information from your actuary says you're in the top 50%. And again, that's a real big blanket, but I think you're probably even higher than, I mean, you're in the higher end of that 50%, so. Yeah, the fact that you've been able to find 250 in the budget, that's a good, I mean, I have some towns that are putting 0 aside. And they just don't, they can't seem to have the wherewithal to find that in the budget. One of the things we've talked about in the past here is that there's a thought that if this retirement system amortization works and you are actually fully funded in 32, then your assessment would go down, because once they amortize that unfunded liability. So there may be some additional resources in 2032 that could be earmarked for OPEB, and I think a lot of people are thinking about that as a possibility. But,
Okay. Thank you very much.
well,
Mrs. Faniff?
Thank you for the presentation. On slide 5, well, I numbered them. It would be the total outstanding debt. Bill.
Yep.
You said it was a high, I think this is your quote, a high level on a community of this size.
low.
It is low.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No, you're on the low end, and particularly before, you know,
On
the
the total
borrowing.
outstanding debt?
Yeah, total
It's low.
outstanding debt, it's
Yeah.
low. And it's actually, even when the number was higher, so much of your debt was being partially paid for by the school building authority that your actual debt has always been, your net debt, I guess, has always been much lower. But no, you're on the low end for the size of your budget.
And this is net debt, correct?
Yes. This is total debt. So there is still some amount of that, I don't know why I can't find the debt.
The 21,309,000?
Yeah, there's still some of that is going to be reimbursed by the school building authority.
Okay.
It's in the financial statements somewhere in a footnote.
So it doesn't include that,
No, that's gross. Yeah, that's your
the
gross debt.
SBAB number. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kalenda?
Bill, thank you for the presentation. I always appreciate it. And so, back when we started the OPEB trust fund, I think it was 2013 you mentioned, we started putting 250, as you know. Have you seen, do you have any recommendations for us, or have you seen, do other communities maybe automatically look to go up 50,000 a year, something? I mean, when you're doing 250 every year, you're actually, you know,
Smaller
value
percent of the
money.
budget or whatever.
Yeah, so, you know, do you see, should we maybe consider going up to 275 or 300, and then, you know, to progressively kind of go up, or
Yeah.
leave it at 250 forever and hope for the best? Or,
I mean, I think anytime you can find, you know, the additional, when you have a $1.2 million trust fund and a $37 million unfunded liability, it is always good to try to, you know, make the dent a little bigger. Whether you build in the overall, even if it was something as small as saying our overall budget is going up 3%, our OPEB contribution is going to go up 3%.
we haven't done that.
I know it's small, but at least it's, you know, it's something. It's just, as you know, I mean, you know better than I do, there's just so many competing, you know, needs, and that is an important one. It's just, sometimes it's a hard sell because it's not an immediate need, right? It's, well, when am I going to spend this money? But as the population ages, as people live longer, this pension and OPEB liability are going to get tougher and tougher for people. So, yeah, if for any reason in a couple of years there's a new revenue resource that's approved by the state, you know, some new, like when the meals tax came in, you know, I know one community tried to allocate that specifically to OPEB and not use it for anything else. So, but in general, when you've got a non-growing revenue side, other than the 2.5%, I understand it gets tough. But yeah, if your budget's going up 3% and you say, I want to see that line go up 3%,
So I'd like to at least have Mr. Purple, Mr. Ballantyne consider that moving forward as a good business practice. And if we can do it, great. It should be at least a discussion every year. I think 250 is probably a good floor. And we're doing, as you said, we're doing something, but other things are going up and this one is remaining flat, which in effect I think is going down, then I would like to see us at least maintain and, you know, not get further behind the curve.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
So, Mr. Kalenda, one of the, just to speak to that briefly, one of the things that we've done, a lot of communities, they try and identify a funding source, be it meals tax, be it hotel revenue, some kind of revenue that they then identify that goes into your OPEB fund. We really have had no such ability to do that here with any identifiable fund. So Brian and I decided to put $250,000 and hardwire it into the benefits section of the budget so that it goes into OPEB every single year and we've made it part of the budget. So in other words, we've reduced, you know, the budget by that 250 by adding that in. We've had conversations about budget, and, you know, so you kind of understand where we are. We are paying off the Algonquin suit money, let's just leave it that way, for, I believe, another 4 years, Brian? After this year or including 20?
3 after.
So
20.
fiscal 20, so 3 after that, that's about $225,000 per year that we've been tying up inside of the budget to handle that as well. I see no reason why we shouldn't plan to allocate some of that to OPEB and hardwire it into that number to increase it moving forward. Maybe not all of it, but I think that we should give that consideration, to your point. We've done a nice job to one of Bill's items. You know, our stabilization isn't as big as we want it to be. I think, you know, we have different views in town on boards and committees and town meeting as to what we should do with stabilization. Town meeting has always been very generous when there's been need. Town meeting is willing to step up. And I know that sometimes that holds you back when it comes to your bond rating. We were very fortunate to make a case otherwise. The one thing I'll point out, we haven't spent anything either. You know, that amount has gone up. Brian and I think, first year I was here, second year, we were able to add $70,000, $80,000 to stabilization. It hasn't grown by big amounts since then, but we've also not touched it. So I think that at least says something, that we're not dipping into that fund either.
All right, thank you, Mr. Purple. But you got a pathway forward where you think there may be opportunities to increase that amount going forward?
I think there are. Immediately, no, but in the
Correct.
future, I think there's a pathway to do that, and maybe, you know, we can identify something, you know, a way to do that moving forward. And maybe, you know, at the end of the year, you know, we can take a look at some things and see if there's something we can do each year too.
Thank you, Mr. Purple. Thank you, Bill.
Any further comments? All right, thank you very much
Welcome.
again. Much
Welcome.
appreciated. All right, next item on the agenda, update from Economic Development Committee. That was asked to be rescheduled, so that will be on a future agenda. And Town Administrator report. Mr. Purple.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got 2 items this evening. The first one was just kind of brought to me late this afternoon, but it is somewhat of a timely issue, so I agreed I'd bring it forward from the town planner. As you know, Planning Board is beginning to move forward with updating the master plan. We've identified 2 members of this committee who will sit on that review. And the planner has been in contact with MAPC, actually had been to a meeting or workshop, and found out that there is money available, technical assistance as well as funding to help do these master plan reviews. There's a 2-page proposal that needs to be prepared. Planning has done a draft of that already, which I will review, and it needs to be submitted sometime next week. Now, this is obviously going to fall in between meetings, and I would ask if the board is okay with me signing the application. Again, the grant, if received, will have to be brought back for consideration, so you always can say no, but I don't want to miss the opportunity. And another benefit may be that there could be some funding available that planning was looking for in 20 for this, that this may help to offset, which may bring their 20 budget number down. No guarantees, but it at least extends that possibility.
Do you prefer a motion or just guidance?
Guidance is fine.
I
Okay.
think you certainly have that.
Okay, thank you. One other item that I wanted to bring up, I had a conversation earlier in the week, late last week, with Mrs. Faniff, and we were discussing about the public safety project, but she was more focused on the golf aspect. And I just wanted to give the board a little bit of an update as to where we are with golf. It's been, I told the board when this started, public safety is a big enough project by itself. Golf adds a completely new dimension to it, and it makes it problematic on a number of levels. But we did close out the season a little bit early last year in order to allow some of the utility work to happen for the public safety facility. The clubhouse has been moved, relocated. The temporary occupancy certificate was received. There's a punch list of items that needs to be completed in order for the full CO to be received. We have, I believe, until June to get that CO, but since the course intends to open on March 15th, that work will be completed long before then. There is the ramp for the clubhouse is being completed within the next couple of days, hopefully by the end of this week. That will be all set. I have been in contact with John Allen, who is the superintendent of the course for the management company, making sure he's kept updated as we move forward on these things. The golf road is all but complete. Parking lot is all but complete. They do have one additional pile of material that needs to be moved in a final grading for the parking lot. The handicap spaces have a base coat on them. It will have a finish coat as soon as we can get plants opening up, probably in late spring. So we are fully intended to have the course available to be open per the management agreement on March 15th. Whether Mother Nature feels the same is to be determined. One other piece with regards to this is the CPC articles that were passed at town meeting to support some of the work that needed to happen because golf was being jostled around a bit by the project. CPC paid for the parking lot and the retaining wall. Both of those came out very nicely. There is another piece of now connecting the actual golf road to be able to access it. Right now, it's kind of a road that has an abrupt entrance to it, and that obviously needs to be taken care of, as well as the route for the buses to be cut through to Woodward from the site, and that will happen over the next several months. That work is pretty much is closer to completion. There was also money, approximately $270,000, which was for the reconstruction of the course that was disrupted by the location of the public safety facility, specifically the first hole and the first tee and the 9th green. And the golf committee, which has done, I think a nice job on trying to, represent the interests of golf and work with the golf course on some of these things, engaged an architect, and they put together plans to go out to bid to do work for the first tee, the 9th green. They also included the 8th tee, irrigation, some other items. The bid went out, and again, we've got about $260,000. About $70,000 in additional contingency could be used, and potentially some money saved from the wall in the parking lot. So, but you probably got between $350,000 and $400,000 you could apply. All that went out to bid, and bids came in over $600,000. So you were presented the bid, you rejected the bid. Architect took another look at this and said, I think we just probably didn't hit it right. I think the climate wasn't good. We looked at everything, we tightened up some issues, worked with the management company. Bill Harrison was very helpful in trying to articulate the changes. Put it back out to bid, 500 and something thousand, almost 600,000 again. So obviously there was an issue with the way that things were put out. Golf committee has since met with the architect. The good news is that the architect is preparing the final specs to put out. They prioritized the work and said, look, the most important thing is the 9th green. So the 9th green is what we're putting out to bid, and we're also putting out item 1 is the 9th, and item 2 is the first tee, and nothing else at this point. That is it. And so those 2 items are going back out to bid. We should have those bids out and results back probably before town meeting, but the work is not going to be completed, obviously, before it opens for the season, so there will be some temporary things in place for the 1st and for the 9th. We will, make whatever accommodations we need to and try to move as quickly as we can, weather allowing, to get some of that work done. In conversations with the superintendent, he's pleased at where we are. He had some concerns that we may not be able to open on time. We did have confirmation this morning at the construction meeting that everything will be done to accommodate golf to make sure that we can open on time. There was no dissension on the part of the contractor, the architect, or the OPM this morning. And I think that he just wants to see that this continues to move forward. We continue to see improvements, that when golfers show up, they continue to see, wow, we're working on this, we're doing this, we're trying to move things forward, which kind of keeps people excited about the course and about playing. So I'm hoping that was what you were looking for, Mrs. Faniff. If you've got any further questions, or if anyone does, I'm happy to.
I want to thank you for the detail and the rationale for the question. Public Safety Building Committee has done a great job allocating funds, but I think the public needed reassurance that there is oversight at this level as well. But thank you for the
Yeah.
detail.
You're welcome. I will say, I have spent a tremendous amount of time on golf, on trying to make sure that it all comes together. And I know it sounds funny that we're spending a lot of time on a couple $100,000, and when the focus should be more on the $19 million. I'm not saying my focus isn't there as well. It's just that trying to make sure that this piece works, because this was an important part of the collaboration that got this project, to the point that it's at.
Right.
So, I don't have anything else unless you have any questions.
Anyone have questions? Nope. Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman's report. Just wanted to remind the public and update that there is a Brew Moon hike at Chestnut Hill on the 18th to celebrate the full moon with a guided hike from 6 to 8. And also, as we had discussed at our goal-setting meeting, we've instituted some office hours to give it a try to be a little more accessible to the public. They are this Thursday from 8 to 10 on 9/22, which is next Tuesday. Mr. Shea and I will be there from 5 to 7. I know Mrs. Faniff and I are working together to try a Saturday as well. It's just another opportunity for us to be accessible to the public. So again, those dates and times are 9/17 from 8 to 10 in the morning, and 9/22 from 5 to 7 at night.
122.
Oh, yeah, why did I write 9? Thank you. Oh, my gosh, I don't know what I'm thinking. Thank you.
Something to look forward to.
Something to look forward to, I guess. Yeah, okay, yes, sorry. 117 and 122. That's all I have for chairman's report. Is there anything under members' report? All right, move on. Consent agenda. Are there any holds that anyone would like to have? Okay,
Can I just
You may.
hold on to
you may.
just to offer?
Okay. So, do we have a motion to approve meeting minutes from January 2nd, 2019? Approve the one-day alcohol license request, Chestnut Hill, January 18th, 2019, from 6 to 8 for Brew Moon Hike. Accept a donation of $100 for Youth and Family Services, and amendment to National Grid easement for 32 Corderville Road Public Safety Facility.
So moved.
Any discussion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Purple.
Madam Chair, I just want to, I'm not going to read verbatim, just two pieces of.
Microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. I don't do that often. I just want to read a couple of pieces from the letter that was submitted to you regarding the recommended appointment for the new business administrator in the building department. I'm pleased to recommend to you Ms. Julianne Lamy as for the new business administrator position in building. As you know, this is a position that has been vacant since November, when Mr. Wood resigned, and we had the new building inspector, Ms. Lavoli, walk into an office with no staff. And it's been a little bit of an interesting situation. I do want to commend the firm Four Leaf for helping to provide administrative and inspectional services during that time, and keeping things moving. Ms. Lamy is a Southborough resident. She's got experience in office administration, sales, customer service. She's also a certified home inspector, which is great. I know that Ms. Lavoli is excited to have her. She's going to be starting with us at the end of January, and I just wanted to put in that information for you. So again, welcome aboard to Ms. Lamy.
All right, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, do we have a motion to accept the appointment of the administrative assistant for the building department?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Welcome to Ms. Lammy. All right. Other matters properly before the board. Continued discussion of fiscal year 20 budget open items. First on the agenda is the Green Community Stipend. I believe Mr. Parent had sent some information over regarding the use of admin funds to offset some of the stipend. Is that correct, Mr. Purple?
So I had sent, I think Mr. Shea had asked a couple of questions, and I sent some information over to the board. The question was, what other positions do we have that are stipended, as well as the people that those stipends or those positions of stipends are assigned to currently. And there was also a note at the bottom that in doing some additional investigation, the funds for the Green Community Stipend could be paid through administrative funds for Green Communities projects. So in essence, when we apply to use the funds that we've received for certain projects, there can be administrative funds carried for those projects. So in essence, the stipend amount could be a no-cost item to the town. And I put that on simply as an informational piece because I thought it was of interest for the discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Shea, I know you had asked the questions. Would you like to touch on?
Sure, and I had asked it really as a follow-up to the discussion that we had last Thursday. I think there was agreement on, A, whether it should be the stipend, and also whether, if there was one, what the amount was. So I looked at it, and I think I'm coming down, and I understand the value of having it with the extra effort that Mr. Parent is putting forth on this. I do still have questions and concerns on the amount, though, particularly in light of the other information provided, and I certainly realize that, it's not a true apples-to-apples comparison with everybody, and there are some justifiable reasons that some are where they are. I think that in my mind, what seemed to make sense was a couple of them. If you look at what the stipend is versus in an equivalent number of hours based on a rate, I could see going along with like 120-hour plus or minus value for the stipend at the rate which comes in at about a $4,800 limit. So I think I'd be in favor of going along with a stipend, but at a lower amount than the $7,500 that was initially suggested.
Thank you. Further comments?
I would like to know, Mr. Purple, would that be workable?
I think anything's workable.
0?
I said, what's that?
0?
Well, I don't know that I would have brought it forward if 0 was workable.
so-
So I,
Not everything.
no, I like I said, I will say what I said last time. I think that there is value to the work that's being done. I do think that there is, a case to be made that there is work, that this is work above and beyond that which is normally required of the position. The designation, from Green Communities, you and I've had this discussion, sometimes the things you get require you to do certain things, and so, again, I think that, I think there is value in this. I understand that every job description carries that umbrella clause, and we talked about that as well. The duties and responsibilities that may not be listed here, they're also your responsibilities as well. I think that kind of goes above and beyond. I do agree that if the board decides to go this route, there may, you may want to add those responsibilities into the job description as well. But again, I think there's value if the board, if the board finds comfort in a number less than 7,500 or wherever I'm interested, I don't know whether Mr. Shea wants to kind of quantify, the 120 hours or kind of how you got to that number.
Well, it's kind of looking at the other people that have stipends and if you look at
If you broke out the percentage,
salary for that position over, 2,080 hours, compared that to what the stipend was, how many equivalent hours does that come into play? Again, recognizing that there are outliers, both high and low,
Right.
In the current one, so
Right.
I just kind of settled in at that, which seemed to be about an average number. So.
and I,
There's no magic to that
right.
method, that's just the
Right.
approach I took in looking at it.
And I told you that this was, this was a little bit of a difficult issue for me simply because, there are towns that are simply requiring it to be done as part of a person's job, redoing the job description, thank you very much, and moving on. And there are other communities that are establishing part-time and full-time positions to handle these green community pieces in energy and sustainability. And I don't know that we're in a position, and given the discussions we've had, of creating a new position to address these issues. But I also don't feel that, like I said, I think there's value to this, so I don't think we're all the way of just giving it to a certain position and saying that this is now your responsibility, for no additional consideration.
I am still in favor of the 7,500. I think that there is a value in doing this. I'm also not against putting it in the job description going forward, but I think for 2 years, this employee has done this. He's had substantial savings for the town. And again, it's not that other employees within the town don't go over and do above. I'm looking at it from a 2-year standpoint and the amount of savings that the town has received in excess of $250,000. Is that
370.
370? Okay. So based on that, I'm still leaning more towards the 7,500. Mrs. Janiff?
Question. Based on the information you just provided, are you suggesting that we're going to get the same amount in grants moving forward? Are you putting a number based on achievement already? But are you saying that this number is now based on a goal of that number?
I
On
assume
receiving a
you're,
grant.
I think you're looking at
I'm
me, but I
looking at
hope you're
both of
asking
you.
her, so.
No, I'm looking at both of you.
Okay, well,
Well, I can speak for me. I think the value of this number is based on the work that's been done over the last 2 years. Obviously, a stipend is something that goes in the SAP, and it's not necessarily a guarantee. A stipend, because if you were, to me, if we were going to increase as in every year, we would have done it through salary. Doing it as stipends based on merit and based on what's saved. Now, at some point down the road, I do understand things may level off and the same amount of effort may be put in with less coming back to the town. I'm just looking at it today from 2 years and the number that's been saved, and that's how I got and agree with the 7,500. Now, next year it may come in at less. Once you reach a certain point, my understanding is there may not be as much involved, it's more maintenance, and I think it can be addressed and adjusted at that point. But in looking at it for today, and maybe that's short-sighted on my part, Mrs. Faniff, I don't know. I'm looking at what we've gotten, the effort that's gone into this, and it's over 2 years. So I'm comfortable with that number today.
I think my concern with it is the clarity, not being able to clarify what the expectations are with the number moving ahead. There has to be some kind of clarity for the employee to receive any sum of money. So anyone that applies for a grant or is successful can ask for the same thing in the future. Similar to earlier this evening with the town planner.
no, I don't think it's the same thing. I think that because the grants, are a lot of the grants or things like that are usually one-offs. You could make or try to make the same case for for Karen Galligan, with all the work that went into, and Brian shaking his head,
Oh, I
with
know.
all the work that went in for the Main Street project, which resulted in, $7-8 million in federal and state funding for Main Street. This is more than a 1-year commitment, because we have energy goals that we need to meet. So, you're asking, well, they've got to know what this is for, and happy to articulate and to be more specific in terms of the things that are put into the job description, but there are energy goals that are set out for the town as required, and the work that is done to acquire grants, that is dealing with the energy services company, that is dealing with the utility company, that is working with the green communities officials at the state in order to, give ourselves every chance to, get this grant money. I think there is again, I'll say it, I think there is value in the position, in the work being done, and the the grants received, and the energy savings that we will see, which will then be money back to the town to be put back into new projects, capital, operations, things of that nature. That's money that will be ours, is not subject to a grant. I think there is value in that, and that's why this is on the table.
I'm not debating the value. I'm
Right.
debating distributing it to any employee on not having a goal of achievement in that process.
I don't know that I agree with you on the goals and achievement.
Well, this is based on a number that we received over the last 2 years.
No, that's
That's-
Mrs. Bracio's. That's her.
Well, you didn't say that was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That number was wrong, so I have to
It's
assume it
good to
was
stand with the
correct.
chair, but that's her.
That's
She's
my opinion.
she's looking retroactively a little bit in order to bring herself, to this.
Is the
And
number correct? I think we both have, so.
like I said, that's an answer, that's something that she would have to
I-
answer, but
I mean, it's up to the board. I'm not in favor of it.
Would you be in favor of Mr. Shea's figure?
I'm not in favor of addressing it this way. I think it's a job description. I just think you're opening up a Pandora's box.
Well, I'm not adverse to Mr. Shea's. I'm supportive of the 75. I was last time. I'm not adverse to Mr. Shea's figure either. I think we should do something. And I'm not beholden to really either, but yeah.
Well, that being said,
I will make a motion to support Mr. Shea's amount for this year and to try it and maybe make an adjustment next year if need be.
Second.
So it will appear in the SAP plan with
so
their
if the
approval.
board moves forward, it approves to do this in the budget, then I will make a request on behalf of the board to the personnel board to make a consideration for a change in the SAP at the town meeting in March. If personnel board agrees, that change would go forward, and then the funding would be in place if town meeting approves the budget as presented.
And it'll be outside the budget, the department's budget.
Correct.
I don't support that. Only because we asked an employee to do something over and above, and he's done it, and he's done an exemplary job of it. Another concern is in fairness, there's been discussions on this number. This number's rotated around. The employee knows that there's a number. At one point, it was much higher than it is now as well. So, if we put this out and had, like some other towns do, I know some towns include it, and I don't disagree that that's the way to do it going forward, to put it in the job description, let it go through the process. But I look at now, there are some towns that do part-time, and there are some towns that do full-time. Again, this employee has done it, and he's done a huge savings to the town. So I appreciate the effort and Mr. Shea coming forward with trying to find a common ground in this.
Yeah, and
I
again,
appreciate that very
no,
much.
and I certainly understand the positions that you and Brian have on this as well, and, you know, I'm just also trying to balance it against the increase that we're also looking at, so,
No.
in the tax rate, so.
If I may.
Yes.
Anything I've said here this evening at this table, I've already had a conversation with the employee. So the employee's very aware of my position. And it's not anything to do with the performance. It's in the way that we're
course.
proceeding, and the individual knows that. We did not have discussions on this amount of money, other than last week when we met here. We were asked an opinion, I gave an opinion, but we never had a formal discussion until last week. And I was even very careful what I said that evening, because my committee members were unaware of the conversations I had already had with the employee, and Mark was aware of those conversations. So nothing said here this evening by me has not been shared with the employee.
And I apologize, Mrs. Faniff, if I implied that in any way. I did not, I wasn't speaking out of turn, and I know that you had said that you had spoke to the employee as well. I'm just giving my opinion. So, would the board be more, I would be willing to come down a little bit, but not to the 48. I don't know if the board would be willing to entertain a split it number at 6,000. I don't know.
In an effort to gain consensus, if that's possible, I would revise my motion for a stipend of 6,000 for the year.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
I'm opposed.
One opposed. Okay. Thank you. Next up, Open Space Preservation Commission. And I believe, Mrs. Faniff, you had a discussion?
Yes, I met with Ms. Gillespie this morning, the two of us, over the budget request and understanding the purchases that the town has made at town meetings, the golf course and the Halloran property, and the educational needs of the members of that committee, which Ms. Gillespie was able to share with me. I think warranted an additional $500 is appropriate. And my understanding from Ms. Gillespie and Mr. Ballantyne was there, that she agreed with an additional $500 in her budget.
Okay. I would support that as well. Discussion?
Yes, so instead of $1,500, it's now 1,000,
It's two.
500.
even more than 1,500.
I'm sorry.
No, it went up.
It went up 500, yes.
So,
Oh, my.
so,
Okay.
so their total budget request this year is,
They had requested $3,000.
Yep.
Yes.
Their budget, current budget is 1,500.
Yep.
And in conversation between Ms. Gillespie and Ms. Faniff today, and Mrs. Faniff had her sign a piece of paper agreeing to it,
I sign?
increasing, my understanding is that my predecessor's predecessor used to do that with the budgets and made sure that everybody signed off. And it was funny because I was having that conversation with Mrs. Hale, and then I saw what you did earlier today and left it with Mr. Valentine. So I thought that was, but anyway, but yes, that was,
So
Sign-
2,000 is the total.
2,000 is
The total.
the,
For open space.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we have to appreciate the volume of work that they're doing with the CR process and acquiring property, whether it be the Halloran property, the golf course, and the oversight. I mean, I have to give Freddie a lot of credit for doing that, and she wants to mentor some of her committee members to do that for the future of the town. So after her explaining it to me, I think it's warranted.
So, I'm not yet in agreement on this at all. I wasn't last week, and we're in a difficult budget year, only getting worse, the next number of years, from what I understand. We are shaving monies off all sorts of budgets, but we're being asked to increase this one for, which I don't believe education is in the charter. And I don't believe that if we do it for them, we should give, educational funding to every board and volunteer board and committee. I don't believe that is what we have a practice of doing. Many things are available through the public domain on, for educational, learning for free. And, if we go to, we're asking so many boards, committees, so many departments in this town to decrease their budgets, and we're gonna ask that the taxpayer spend more for this particular budget, if I heard correctly last week, for things like attendance at seminars to discuss butterflies, insects, and invasive species. Not saying they're not important things, but my goodness, I cannot see spending more money for educational excursions or seminars for things like that, much of which I'm confident can be obtained through the public domain for free in this kind of budget environment.
Mrs. Faniff.
The invasive species and the butterflies and the flowers, we want to talk about that. But if you look at Davis Farm, the management plan there, open space and conservation, they take care of it. It's a town property. Like I go back, we can't keep acquiring land if we're not going to maintain the lands, and that's part of what they do. They oversee our
thought-
own town lands.
I also thought that open space was to not touch the land.
They don't
One-
touch it.
You don't
the
touch it, you
gardens
let
are
it,
down there.
whatever grows in there is to grow, but it's, and again, I cannot see spending more money in this environment. Again, if we're flush with money, that's one thing, and, but, I'm not convinced that this is a wise expenditure of the taxpayer dollar at this time.
Educating the commitment of volunteers on committees.
Then we should do that for every board and committee, not this one. We should raise by an equal percentage every board and committee's funding, so that every board and committee can be educated in their field of volunteering.
Any further?
So I support it. I know that there are a number of other committee members and boards that do have other training sessions and educational things. I know that there are MMA programs that advisory committee members take advantage of, that I believe are funded through the town, at least there were when I was on the advisory committee. We send Mark and Vanessa as part of their job. Obviously, they're not board or committee members, but again, I think with the commitment to having it go towards the training program, so they're not continuing to pay out of pocket, I think that's appropriate.
Okay. Do we have a motion to,
I'll move the open space budget at $2,000 that our board approved.
do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. 3 to 2.
3-2, okay.
3 2. All right. Veteran Services. Mr.
I trust this
Yeah.
is being funded at the original amount and not being reduced, Mr. Purple?
This is being funded at the amount that Mr. Wilson agreed to, and then Mr. Stearns also agreed to, which was the reduced number.
And our veterans agent is confident that he can support our veterans at the budgeted amount,
He
the
is,
lesser amount?
he is confident that there is sufficient funds there to provide the same level of services that were being provided in the past years by his predecessor, yes.
Let us hope so.
Do we need to make a motion?
No, I think
didn't think
at
so
the
either.
last meeting that you
Question.
voted to support the budget except for these items. You voted on all of these items, and so I think that.
I think we held this item, I thought.
We
Mr.
did.
Purple.
You did hold,
So-
well, if
so
you'd like to
Just to
support,
cover it, I'll move that we support, or that we recommend.
support the recommended.
Support the recommended budget amount from the finance team.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you, everyone. Next on the agenda, scheduling of presentations on warrant articles and pre-town meeting.
Of course, the moderator has chosen this moment to walk out of the room. So, Madam Chair, I wanted just to have a discussion with the board. We have 3 meetings left until the board is scheduled to sign the warrant for town meeting. We can go through that a little bit tonight if you wish. I'm just running through quickly. We are looking at approximately 41, significant amount of citizen petition articles. 43, about 46 articles. There may be a couple of articles, for example, Mr. Ballantyne and I were talking earlier, we separate up the borrowing articles for capital versus the ones that we're paying cash for. We have no borrowing articles for capital. That article will come off, so that would reduce it to 45 articles. And then there are a couple of articles that are still waiting for some wording to determine whether they are actually remain on the warrant. But I wanted to discuss with the board, again, we're meeting February 5th and February 19th are the only 2 meetings left before you're supposed to sign the final version of the warrant. We normally do have a meeting that, where we allow sponsors to come in and make presentations, so it gives the board the information that they need to determine whether they'll support or not support an article. And I would suggest that that probably be the meeting of the 5th, unless you schedule a different meeting. And then the 19th, the board could finish taking any motions that you need to and sign the final warrant. Advisory is also aware that they need to have any positions on articles by February 19th, so they're working toward that date as well. The moderator normally comes in about a month before town meeting, so February 19th works out nicely. I've chatted with Mr. Semino, and if we did the pre-town meeting with the moderator, if he can take the floor for the meeting, for the beginning of our meeting on the 19th, to do the pre-town meeting, talk about the logistics, presentations, issues, motions. We'll have council here for the 19th. That would be his preference.
That is school vacation week, so hopefully that's not too much of a conflict with
Well,
others
that's,
that
I
would
think,
need
the
to
first
attend.
question as to who's here for the 19th, and if the 19th is an issue, do we need to pick another,
Mhm.
do we need to pick either another week or another date?
Likely another week.
Yeah, because I'm potentially away that week as well. I don't know.
So I plan to be around, I'm just making the point that with the many others in town that would need to potentially come or would want to come and present, there's likely gonna be numerous conflicts.
Right. Well, I don't think people are presenting to you on the 19th. I think we will do that at the meeting on the 5th, unless you have a meeting prior to that to do that. And then on the 19th, the town moderator, who is now standing at the podium, will then conduct the pre-town meeting to go over the logistics on the 19th. Again, it's probably better if we have more people here than not. So I bring this issue up now just to try and get us set on dates so we can make sure that we can get information out to sponsors. We can, get things set, because things have been moving pretty quick this budget season because of the shortened time frame. It's going to move pretty quick over the next 3 to 4 weeks. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Can I throw a suggestion out? And it's probably going to be shot down, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. There's an extra Tuesday this month. If the board, just for discussion purposes, could consider even having a meeting on the 29th, doing all the presentations at that point in time, potentially taking positions if we can at that time, and then the meeting on the 5th could be pre-town meeting, and again, obviously this is up to the moderator as well. On the 5th, we could do pre-town meeting and any positions that may need to be held over. So a meeting on the 19th, I don't necessarily know, other than potentially to sign the warrant. Mr. Purple, you can speak to that?
Yeah, I think there would need to be some time either between the 5th and the 19th. So my intention is that any articles that have wording that is still required, and again, there's probably 3 or 4, and actually a few more considering CPC, and CPC's meeting this evening to try and get their final positions. So that wording will come from the chair shortly. But I'd like to have all the wording by the end of this month in order to give town council sufficient time to review everything and make sure that everything is in order before the board signs the final warrant. So that will happen after the 5th, but could happen before the 19th. And we can try and stay away from that school vacation week.
I mean, that's something to consider. Again, I don't think it's a bad thing to get everything wrapped up in advance. But again, that also, I don't know people's schedules and, where that may conflict. That's something to consider. And again, I don't know, as far as the moderator goes, if February 5th works potentially for you for a pre-town meeting?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it does. My only request of Mr. Purple was to do one further in advance of town meeting.
Microphone?
Hello? Yes. My request of Mr. Purple was to do a pre-town meeting further in advance than we typically have, because the warrant is so long and the procedure is different this year, et cetera, et cetera. So nothing magical about the 19th, except that was the date that I wanted it at least 30 days in advance. We can do it much further in advance. The 5th would be fine with me.
Discussion.
A question on the warrant. The number of articles that need a public hearing, because they need to be posted and advertised if they're going before the planning board. I know that we don't have details on some of them, but
Correct.
we have a date to address that too.
I think the only article that potentially may require a hearing in terms of planning board process for a formal hearing process would be this article for any zoning bylaw change addressing 5G rollout, either through restriction, ban, or moratorium. And I am having trouble getting traction with an attorney that is comfortable providing me some information on this and that. The cable attorney that the cable committee is using is not well-versed in this and has passed me around a little bit. So I'm trying to get some traction on this, because obviously whatever I get is going to need to be reviewed, is going to need to go through the planning board process, and as you note, time is short. That is the only one that would require a formal process.
So it's unknown,
Correct.
basically.
I don't know if this is what you were thinking about, but I don't think there's any reason why that hearing has to occur before the pre-town meeting. It would just be a matter of, it either stays on or comes off the warrant.
I understand, but we also need a presentation.
Sure.
We don't have it, we don't have the language, even if it is part of pre-town meeting. I'm trying to set a deadline for people to get the information to the appropriate boards, committees that might be supporting those articles.
Yes.
So maybe we could follow up with the planning board to see if they're co-sponsoring it, or if it's a citizen's petition only. There was some discussion which would be helpful.
So if you recall, Ms. Davis,
Right.
who is extremely knowledgeable on this, and she sent out a lot of information, I've tried to pass that along to the board. One of the avenues that could be explored, that has been explored by other communities, including some Massachusetts communities, is the Board of Selectmen passing certain policies for these companies coming in and, as to if they're looking to roll out 5G technology, these are the policies and procedures, and this is the step-by-step that you have to follow, which, allows you to have control over those issues, at least in the short term.
I mean, we're not gonna solve that this evening, but I think we're-
Correct.
in fairness to the individual that's done a lot of
Correct.
work, we need to give them a time
Right.
frame that there may be a public hearing
I
required.
agree.
So that they can meet that too, and we have the information to do what
I
Paul's
agree.
asking.
And I've gone back to Ms. Davis, and we've talked about that as a stopgap measure, that policy, and she agrees that it is a short-term solution, but probably not the long-term solution. So in the event that we're not able to get to a zoning bylaw change at this point, the policy will help to address the issue in the short term, and we can have the time to work on a longer-term solution.
Okay, so thoughts from the board on the 29th. That gives you ample time, Mr. Purple, to get the word out to anyone that may wish to present.
Yeah, so I will send something out to all of the sponsors, and allow them the time to come in. We'll then get any presentations that they may have to present to the board. If you've got guidelines you'd like me to present, if you've got time limits that you want to put, depending on the number of responses that we have. I know Personnel Board will want to come, and, we'll need to make sure we have a time limit for some of the information.
That wasn't specific to you, Betsy.
Well, if you'd like to,
Well, and again, I would think we would want to somewhat be in line with what your,
Yeah, we're talking about two different things right now.
oh, no,
You're talking
yeah,
about, and I think
We're
you're talking about a
talking
town meeting
simply-
presentation. I think they're talking about presentations to them prior to their taking a position.
position.
for the articles, for the boards to take positions
So
on the articles.
let's be clear about
That's
that.
all,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And I think we'd also invite advisory to the
Advisory.
same meeting.
Yeah.
So that, whether you want to do it as a joint meeting or not, I think that it gives them the opportunity to kind of streamline their process. They're beginning work on the budget tonight. They're meeting every Tuesday for the next 4 or 5 weeks, probably. And they're under the same constraints to take positions on articles as well, so.
And I think also if somebody can't make the 29th, by having the meeting still on the 5th, it gives them the opportunity, but it gives us also the opportunity to take positions on the 5th. And I think, again, that makes the reason for the meeting on the 19th less, I guess. We would still need to meet to sign the warrant, but again,
I think it's a good idea.
okay. So, Mr. Purple, that's our plan, and we'll plan on the pre-town meeting on the 5th. Do you have anything, Mr. Sumino, you'd like to add as to maybe your expectation and?
Well, it's going to be very important. I mean, as I said, the warrant's going to be, is shaping up to be very long. In terms of how we will run town meeting itself, by necessity, when we talk about presentations or how much time we are going to spend on each article and how those will get presented to town meeting voters, we will be tight. And so, for anybody who's watching at home or here tonight, in terms of presentations at town meeting, we will have to truncate those And I haven't given it a full amount of thought about how to best fit that together, depending on what the final warrant looks like. But we'll talk about that on the 5th.
So Mr. Samin, if I may, makes a very good point. So people had set town meeting for Saturday in anticipation of, all right, maybe more people will come on a Saturday. But if we have a 3-day town meeting, I mean, that blows that right out of the waters. I mean, you have a Saturday for sure, but then you have lots of stuff that would we come on a Sunday? Maybe not. You come on a Monday, you know, too.
I think
I think your point is very well taken, that if the presentations aren't mindful of time, you know, we could very well be, with the length of this pending warrant, be there for multiple days.
Well, we won't. We may, but the presentations will not be long. I mean, people are going to have to do their educating of the voters in advance. Town meeting is not the time to explain what your article
That
is
is
about
true
for the
also.
first time.
And they're also going to have the opportunity, if I may, to come before us on the 29th, and that's another opportunity for the voters to hear what the article's about, and the questions that we may ask may hopefully answer some that they may have as well.
I would add, just to what Mr. Kalenda said, by the way, the article that was passed last year, after Saturday, we go to Monday, not Sunday. But there's actually 2 sessions on Saturday, okay? So there's a morning session, there's a break, a 2-hour, I believe, break, and then the evening session. And query whether you'd even have the same number or, you know, an equivalent group of people in the morning on Saturday versus the evening on Saturday. So you've already got, in my estimation, you've already got 2 sessions to deal with just on Saturday. And what kind of continuity you might have and how much you're going to be able to get done is a question. I mean, it's new for all of us, you know, the first time this year.
If dinner were offered Saturday evening, maybe pizza, Mrs. Semino?
Don't look at me.
Nice idea.
And Mr. Semino, can you just go over, for those that may have forgotten the hours for town meeting, what they will be on Saturday?
Yes, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the first, we gavel in at 1 o'clock until 5. We break for 2 hours, 5 to 7, and then we come back at 7 p.m. through 11 p.m. If we are not done, we come back on Monday in a 7 to 11 block like we always have, and Tuesday and Wednesday until we finish. That's why the article last year was dubbed Town Meeting Week, because theoretically, that's what could happen. All the more reason that we really need to be ready to streamline doing the town's business. We're there to do the town's business. And like I said, if anyone is explaining what an article is about for the first time, and it needs, you know, a significant amount of explanation, that has to be done ahead of time. So we'll talk more about that on the 5th.
Again, if I
Yes.
just could, I mean, the library has been very generous in the past in offering time and space to article proponents as a way to educate people, and given the number of articles that we're potentially looking at, and potentially time constraints that we may have, and time limitations that we may have that will be at town meeting, I think those that do have articles may want to avail themselves of the library, community house, and other venues as a way to inform the public and educate them in advance of town meeting, and I encourage them to do that.
That's a great idea. Absolutely.
And certainly printed materials available in the lobby on town meeting day, you know, that's an option as well, or a supplemental way of you know, informing the voters. Time on the stage as an article comes up will be at a premium. So as many other ways to educate that folks can take advantage of, they should.
Mrs. Faniff?
Town meeting day is a different day for this town this year for the first time. In the warrant at the top, it should say the hours of the town meeting for the first day. It's not in the warrant anywhere as far as the 1 o'clock, not in the draft I have anyway.
Yes, that can be added.
It should be added. Thank you.
Anything further? Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Semino.
Okay,
See
thank
you
you.
on the 5th. Thank you. Next item is discussion of warrant article to set new town meeting dates. I know, Mr. Semino, you may want to hang around. So the reason for this was to change it back based on the speed of trying to do things in advance with the town, with the school budgets and whatnot. This would move it back to the last Saturday in April, I think was the date that was discussed. And Mr. Purple, you can speak to, from the finance side, how tough this year has been based on the expedited schedule. If you could just touch on that.
Sure. So we normally begin the process, the finance team, Brian and I will sit down and prep this board for what we see coming in this budget season, usually in October. And we give you a sense of what you're going to be looking for. Departments begin their work sometime in November, usually sometime after Thanksgiving. Before Christmas, we get all the budget requests in, and then we begin to work through them with the departments, and sometime, usually mid to late January, this board has taken a position advisory, then begins their work, and the work on the warrant continues. We started the process this year just after Labor Day. And I do want to say the boards and committees came along and did what we asked of them so that things weren't, any more compressed than they had to be. I do want to, to your point, Madam Chair, just to recognize that you have essentially recommended a budget at this point, and we are still waiting for the governor to release his numbers for the state, which will affect our regional school assessment, which is really, unless Brian tells me I'm wrong, the last number really that we're waiting for that could have an impact one way or the other on this budget. Everything else is in. We've gotten them early. It's required us to be a little more conservative in our approach because we don't have definitive numbers this early in the process. That's been the challenge, I think, this year.
Okay, thank you. And it's not to move it from Saturday. I think town meeting was very clear that they wanted to give Saturdays a try to see if it actually does give more people the opportunities to come. And so that's what the placeholder was put, is to try to put it back to April, so it makes it, we have more concrete numbers and we're not guessing. And when we take a position on a budget like we're doing now, it could certainly change. And I think it makes advisory's job a lot tougher, as well as our finance team. So that's kind of the mindset behind doing that. And there was actually a second piece, if the board wants to consider, is we run into, like we just spoke about, there's 46 articles, and there is the potential to go multiple nights. A lot of towns, the majority of towns actually have a fall and a spring town meeting. And the spring basically deals with your budgets, and the fall tends to deal with the citizens petitions. Not that there can't be any in the spring, but more of your operational type items, zoning type items. So that's something for the board to consider as well. And again, the majority of towns, and I actually have a number that I didn't bring with me tonight, but there is a number that the majority of towns surrounding us actually do have it, that may actually help participation at town meeting, because you could get a lot done in one day versus babysitter. We've heard that has been an issue in a lot of cases for families and everything that want to participate, that may not. This may give them a better opportunity as well, one night in the spring, one night in the fall. So that's just something for the board to consider. For that article, I don't know anybody's thoughts on that. I would certainly be interested, and if the board would be even just comfortable with potentially even just considering moving the date back to April, that would be fine too. So I open that up for any thoughts and any discussion.
I support.
Mr. Kalenda.
I would as well. I mean, I think we definitely need to move the date. I mean, it's been a significant challenge for our schools, for the town itself. So And as far as Saturdays, I've heard from a lot of people that are not happy about giving up a Saturday, so, but that's what some want to try.
Yep.
So, you know, I guess we could see what happens this coming March on a Saturday, and then try it again for the following year. That'll be 2 Saturdays, and
Yep.
if we see the numbers are much bigger, outstanding. If they're much less, then we should consider thereafter going back to what the town had previously done.
Absolutely. And do you have any thoughts on potentially adding a fall, or are
I
you
would
more?
not be adverse to that.
Okay.
You're talking non-monetary articles.
Non-monetary, yes, articles. And I'm pretty sure, and I know, Mr. Purple, you've been in towns that have done a spring and a fall. I'm going to put you on the spot and just have you touch on a little kind of how their procedures on, or their guidelines on how other towns tend to do it.
So other towns that I've had the pleasure of serving in, normally would have a spring town meeting, an annual town meeting, and a fall town meeting. Spring town meeting is normally used to handle all of the town's business, capital, and it depends. In some towns, you've handled the budget, the capital, you've handled any zoning issues, you've handled all of those things in the spring, and then the fall meeting is used to do any cleanup that you need to do prior to setting the tax rate. So normally that meeting is held, sometime between Columbus Day and Thanksgiving. Obviously with the way that, and with the aggressiveness, I think, Brian may say, that we set our tax rate. This year we set our tax rate at the beginning of October. Most communities aren't doing that until almost 2 months later. That would mess with a fall town meeting schedule. You want to do that after the town meeting in case any of the decisions you make would take effect at that, after the meeting, and would have to be accounted for on the recap sheet. Some communities put off they do the financial pieces in the spring, and they handle the zoning pieces in the fall. And they kind of, try and separate things out that way, so people have an understanding of what kind of things and what kind of issues they'll expect at the meetings. Again, you can't control when citizen petitions come in, but it does at least try to separate out the issues.
And we've had how many specials in the last, since you've been here?
Well, I don't know that that's a fair
No, but.
assessment, but I think we've had probably 5 specials since I've been here. But again, we've also had, 2 of the largest issues that this town has seen being Main Street and public safety, which have required, multiple town meetings and special town meetings to deal with that.
And my only point for bringing that up is, we have had, for a different variety of reasons, we have had a fall town meeting, and there has been turnout, obviously, to get the town's business done at a fall. So that was my point for asking that. So,
I think right now we need to really be focused on this year's town meeting and see what the participation is before we ask for multiple town meetings.
okay. So we could move forward with just going with a April last week and last Saturday in April then. That's fine, and then we can readdress it as need be going forward.
And that would be an article recommended or sponsored by our board
Yes.
for that?
Yes, there is a placeholder currently.
There is.
There is. Yes. All
That's
right.
good.
So one additional item, are you simply looking to change the existing bylaw and change the date and continue with the existing structure?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
As opposed to
So it would need to be changed
As opposed to what? Are you thinking of something different?
I'm just asking about the structure. The moderator has commented that, we start at 1, we go to 5, we take a break, we come back at 7, we go to 11. And again, we haven't tested that, so we have no idea. We're kind of talking out of, with no experience behind that. I've had town meetings on weekends in other communities that have done it differently, that have worked successfully, but I don't want to poison the discussion with any of that issue. But you do have language in the bylaw that says you establish a town meeting week. So therefore, if you're simply going to change the date to the last Saturday in April and say that you're establishing a town meeting week in April, that's not possible, given the dates.
You have to conclude. it
Okay,
in
so that's why, for example, the bylaw says a Saturday town meeting in March, town meeting week in March, which is why it was backed up to the 23rd instead of going with March 30th, which would then extend town meeting week into April. So I think it's a little more, if you want to keep the same structure, that's fine, but you're going to have to tweak some of the wording
and move it up.
to make it for you, to make it work for you. And again, April's a tricky month
It is.
with Easter and Passover and school vacation and everything else. But that's why I think the end of the month seems to make sense before you get into May, which presents a whole nother myriad of issues. But again, I think you need to do something with the language, so you're not saying that, you're holding this meeting in April, for example, and creating a town meeting week. So there's gonna need to be some tweaking in the language.
Okay.
I can have council work on that.
Please.
Yeah,
I was
you're
just
all
gonna
staring at
ask.
me, so I was like,
No,
I can
and-
have council
and
work
we will
on
And we will
that.
need to do our homework to educate everybody on why we're doing this. And
Absolutely.
take advantage of
Yes,
venues that
Okay.
are available to.
Absolutely. Okay. So, Mr. Smino, I guess maybe we had you stay prematurely, but I guess it was a good discussion for you to hear as well.
Yes.
And I don't know if you particularly have thoughts. I would certainly like to give you the opportunity to,
Just to say that, like Mr. Kalina said, we haven't tested this. To Mrs. Fanna's point about participation, I don't know, if people knew it was gonna be one day in the spring and one day in the fall, and they knew it wasn't gonna be more than one day, maybe you get more. Because I'm going and I know it's gonna be done. But who knows?
who knows?
Well, and just when you get ready to educate Mr. Purple on going to April, why can't it be a week in April versus a week in March? You don't have to tell me now, but I'm just,
well, I'm just saying,
it wasn't so clear why.
logically, if you're picking the last Saturday in April, there likely isn't gonna be the ability to have a full week,
Why?
stays
Because
within
it
the
goes
same-
into May? Is that what you're saying?
because it goes into May.
What's the magic of that? So what?
But if the bylaw says that you need to have a town meeting week, the current bylaw says you need to have a town meeting week in March.
Well, you say start in
Yeah,
March.
start.
Start in April.
I'm not sure we want to kick things off with semantics, but
Well,
no, like I
you're
said,
saying
look,
it's
I
significant.
would
If it is,
look,
then-
if we wanted to interpret it that way, we could have done it on March 30th and let anything that ran over go into April. But I
Yes.
think the 23rd maintains at least maintains the spirit of the bylaw.
Yeah.
Mr. Shea?
So,
So,
Week away.
a couple points with this that are just coming to me now. So, we're in a regional high school with Northborough,
yes.
and there are a number of articles that could potentially correlate with Northborough, and then there are elections, or some articles that may fall to elections afterwards. And is there adequate time to act on things at town meeting and get them on a warrant, on a ballot, if we pick that date?
Well, how historically in the past, town meeting's been in April?
It's always been at the
First
beginning
week
of
of
It's
April.
always been the
Beginning.
beginning of April, and
Okay.
you've had roughly a month until
Yeah.
the election.
So, I don't know that needs to get answered.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we can answer it
Tonight.
here and now,
Yeah.
but
I can ask the clerk the question.
Anything further? All right, thank you, Mr. Semino. The next item, discussion of manner to honor service of John Wilson, that is being held at this point. So at this point, the board will be entering into executive session per MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21, and not returning to open session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, DPW, police unions, as the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body. Braccio, aye?
Shay, aye.
Hannaford.
Kalenda, aye.